Okay, good morning. Hi, everybody. It's nice to have everyone here this morning. What a nice, good-looking group, big turnout. Let me begin by first thanking the City of Port St. Lucie for inviting me, but more importantly, for having this event again this year. It's so important that we have preparation. I don't know if we can turn that down just a bit. That seems very loud. Preparation is the key. We learned that last year with Hurricane Matthew. We've learned it every year with Francis and Jean and Wilma. It's all about preparation. So having an event like this makes a big difference, and I'm happy that the city is doing it. And you should congratulate yourself for being here because you're taking the first step toward hurricane preparation. Let's get everybody in here. Grab a seat. There's a lot of seats up front. No one wants to sit in the front row. I mean, come on. I'm not going to bite. We got big seats right here in the front row. All right, here's some brave folks in the front row. Here we go. Congratulations. Got the best seat in the house. All right, well, let me begin by telling a story. And it's about Hurricane Matthew from last year. Everybody remember Matthew? Yeah? Okay. Not going to forget that one, are we? It was October 6th. It was that Thursday morning. It was the morning of the day when Hurricane Matthew was going to hit the Treasure Coast. Matthew was scheduled to make landfall around here that evening. So it was about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and went right to my tablet and started looking at hurricane models. I started looking at charts. I started looking at the latest talking points and information from the National Hurricane Center. Spent about 15, 20 minutes looking at all of that. I put it down, and for about 5 seconds, I was scared to death. I was literally scared to death for 5 seconds. Then I got myself together. I was scared to death because I was convinced at that point that we were going to get hit by a Category 4 hurricane. And I knew if that Category 4 hurricane hit here in Port St. Lucie, it was going to be awful. I mean, the damage would have been catastrophic. So I went to work that day, and I went on the air with Sandra. And Sandra's here, by the way, if you want to chat with her. And so's Chris. We have a little booth just around the corner. And I love working with Sandra. She's fantastic. We went on there about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were on until 5 in the morning. We were tracking the storm. We're on every 5 or 10 minutes or so, you know, showing you the storm, talking about the storm, showing its position. By 5 o'clock in the morning, we were both exhausted. But at 5 o'clock in the morning, it was clear we were not going to be hit by the storm. By 5, that storm was up by the Kennedy Space Center. It came within 10, maybe 12 miles of our coastline, but it was far enough north that I knew it was not going to come back and hit us. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was exhausted and tired, but at the same time, this emotion came over me. I was giddy. I was so giddy and so happy because I knew at this point that we were going to be okay. I didn't drive to work the day before. My wife dropped me off, so someone gave me a ride home. And I got home, and it was about 6 in the morning at that point, and I had to wake up my wife because I didn't have my keys either. And not proper planning by me, but she didn't care. So we had kind of an emotional homecoming. We were both very happy that the storm had passed. And then my youngest daughter, who was 20 at the time, came out, and we all had a family group hug. So at 5:45 in the morning, I said, we have to celebrate. So at 5:45 on Friday, October 7th, my wife and I, not my daughter, we each had a little bit of Irish whiskey to celebrate the fact that that storm had missed South Florida. We were so lucky, so fortunate that storm did not hit. It was as close a call as I can ever recall. And we were just incredibly lucky. And for you, if you were here at the time, it was a great hurricane drill, wasn't it? Because you prepared, I'm guessing, for that storm. You did what we talk about all the preparations, what this event is all about. You put up the shutters or you put up the plywood, you got the supplies, you hunkered down, you watched and listened to the coverage, and then the storm missed. So now, if we face a challenge this year, and we very well might, you know what to do. You are hurricane ready because of that big hurricane drill from Hurricane Matthew. Because it did not hit, you know what worked for you last year and what didn't work. You know what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. You know what steps you have to take. And that's the key. We all learn from our experiences in a storm like that. And not only did we learn as the public, but so did the city of Port St. Lucie and the county of St. Lucie County and the state of Florida. The folks of the Hurricane Center, they learned a little bit more too. So the bottom line is, as we embark on the 2017 hurricane season, we're all a little bit better prepared for what may come our way this year. And this year, it's expected to be busy again. You know, they upped the numbers recently from Colorado State University and from NOAA. Both groups, even the folks over in the UK, are predicting above average hurricane activity this year. Now, they can't tell us where those storms are going to be. If they're going to be close to the coastline, like last year, we had so many storms make landfall, or if they're going to be out to sea. I mean, we could very well have 10 or 15 storms, but if they're all in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that's fine. You know, I go back to 1992. That was a, quote, quiet hurricane season. There were only 4 hurricanes that entire year. There were only 7 storms the entire year, and the average is 12. But one of them was Hurricane Andrew. So one storm right here, it's a busy year. Let's hope it's not. By the way, we've already had one storm, Arlene, back in April. So we're already off to a start, and we'll see what happens in the coming weeks and months. All right, I'm going to go through a few little pictures here, talk a little bit about some hurricane history, how storms form, assuming I can make this work. There we go. So there it is. There's our buddy Matthew from last year. And also bear in mind as you look at that, look how close the storm came. It missed South Florida, yet Matthew is still the ninth costliest hurricane in U.S. history. It's number 9. It produced 15 billion with a B in damage, and it didn't hit us. Imagine if it had, how bad the damage would have been, how high the damage figure might have gone, and how much higher it might be in the rankings. But that's the storm. By the way, I don't know if anybody watch our special Thursday night at 8 or Wednesday night at 8? Okay, good, thank you. We talked a little bit about the wobble that night because during our coverage of Hurricane Matthew, Sandra and I were watching the storm on the visible satellite imagery, and we noticed it was moving a little north and a little east. And we started talking about the wobble that night. And we talked about it so much that I'm told the wobble became kind of a drinking game on social media. Every time I said wobble or Sandra said wobble, somebody took a drink. That's what I hear. But our piece on Wednesday night during our hurricane special is we looked at that wobble, and at the time, it sure seemed like the wobble had saved South Florida. Hey, there's some seats over here, folks. There's a bunch over here. There's a few up front as well. It sure seemed like that wobble had saved South Florida, but we weren't sure. So we went down to the Hurricane Center, and they looked at it, and they said, you know what? There was a wobble, but it didn't help Florida, and it hurt the Bahamas. The overall path of the storm never changed. Inside, the eye wall went through an eye wall replacement cycle. That changed just a little bit. And because of that, you had a Category 3 hurricane hit Grand Bahama, but the hurricane force winds only came within 10 or 12 miles of South Florida. So we talked a lot about the wobble back in October. That's Matthew. Let's not look at that anymore. So let's talk a little bit about tropical cyclones. That's the generic term for what we call a hurricane. We call them hurricanes. If you lived in the Western Pacific, it would be a typhoon. If you lived in the Indian Ocean, it would be a cyclone. We call them tropical cyclones in meteorology. If you lived in Australia, the nickname for a hurricane is Willy Willy. I don't know why, but the Australians have lots of unique names. It starts with a tropical depression. Does this thing point to? Oh, look at that. Tropical depression, 39 miles an hour. When it gets to become when the winds get to 39, it's a tropical storm, and that's when we give it a name. And we have a list of names. There's six different lists. Six different lists. So we rotate the list. So the list we're using this year was used 6 years ago, unless you have a really bad hurricane like Matthew, and that name is taken off the list and replaced by another male M name. And we've been using hurricane names, since the 1950s. If it gets to 74 miles per hour or greater, it becomes a hurricane. Here's a picture of Hurricane Katrina. Look at that storm. Pretty amazing, wasn't it? The amazing thing about Katrina, sometimes hurricanes do things that surprise us, and sometimes hurricanes can seemingly, it's good news when in fact it's not. For example, Hurricane Katrina at one point was this huge, major, powerful storm. And as it got closer and closer to the Gulf Coast, it started to weaken. And you think, oh, that's great. The storm is a little weaker. The winds are down a little bit. But because it weakened, the wind field actually expanded, and that pushed more water on shore here. So because the storm weakened, it actually produced more damage. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what happened with that storm. If it had stayed strong, the hurricane force winds would have been confined to a smaller area, so the damage might have been a little bit smaller as well. But there's a hurricane, a tropical cyclone versus an extratropical cyclone, kind of the storms you see across the Midwest, across the Northeast. Again, tropical cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, willy willies, whatever you want to call them, they develop all over the world. The basin that we're concerned about is right here. The Eastern Pacific is very active. Some of the biggest storms form here in the Pacific, and as you can see, even in Australia, they have their storms as well. In terms of tropical cyclone history, here's our problem. It's called geography. Look at that. One of the reasons we get hit so often? We stick out. We stick out like a sore thumb. I mean, look at that map. That really explains everything. You see all these storms out here, and there we are in Florida, just waiting to get hit. And when you focus on our area, the southeastern coast, even more storms. And how about major hurricanes? Major hurricane would be category 3, 4, or 5. Look how many come off the coast of Africa. This is what we call the Cape Verde season. You see the islands here, that's the Cape Verde Islands. You get these little tropical waves, they come off the coast of Africa, they go all the way across. They have lots of time to get strong out here in the Atlantic and then come right toward the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, Florida, or the East Coast. And some of the big storms, like Hurricane Andrew, for example, was a Cape Verde storm. Hurricane Francis, for us, was a Cape Verde storm. Some of the biggest ones are the ones that come off the coast of Africa. Hurricane season, as you know, starts in June, but the peak isn't until August, September, and early October. And the reason, twofold. One, the keys for a hurricane to form, you need warm water. So the sun is really cooking the water. So by August and early September, that's when the tropical waters are at their warmest. And the second is wind shear. And in August and September typically is when the wind is at its lightest. So that's the best time for a tropical storm or hurricane to form. Still, having said that, a hurricane is a rare event. When you look at weather phenomenon, for example, lightning. I mean, we get thousands of lightning strikes in Florida in an afternoon. And when you add them up, I mean, there are millions, billions of lightning strikes. Tornadoes. The United States has about 1,000 tornadoes each year. But hurricanes, over the 6-month hurricane season, over thousands of miles of ocean, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, on average, there's only 6 hurricanes. So it takes a special series of circumstances all coming together. Yet when they form, they are incredible. We call them the greatest storm on Earth. More power, more energy in a hurricane than any other type of storm. For example, a Category 1 hurricane, winds of 75 miles per hour. If we could grab the energy from them, we'd put FPL out of business, because the power equivalent of a hurricane, 24 hours of a Category 1, would power all the homes in North America for 6 months. Just amazing amount of power. We can break down month by month. Again, the hurricane season is 6 months long, where storms are likely to form. And again, Florida is front and center. Here's June. On average, you might get one storm every other year in June. In July, we're watching not only the Gulf, but the Caribbean. And you can see this is where storms tend to form, and this is the direction they tend to move. We get into August, and especially September, storms can form, again, off the coast of Africa, here, very close to us. September, by far the busiest month. More hurricanes in September than all the other months combined. You get into October. Again, this part of the world is kind of cut off because water temperature is a little warmer and the wind shear is starting to pick up. So we're watching areas close to home. And even in November, you can have storms. If you were here in 2005, that was the year where the hurricane season started fast and just kept on going. We had so many storms that year, we ran out of storm names. I mean, we had to use the Greek alphabet as a supplemental list. It just went on and on and on. So let's build a tropical cyclone. What do I need? Well, I need a pre-existing disturbance, like maybe a tropical wave, maybe a cold front, something like that. It's got to be about a few degrees north of the equator. We call the hurricane breeding ground between 10 and 20 degrees north latitude. Wind shear needs to be light. You need warm surface temperatures. You need an unstable atmosphere, which is fairly common, and you need a lot of content in the moisture in the atmosphere. And then some of the factors that influence how much stronger a storm is going to get. Hurricane Center does a great job with track forecasts, where today's storm is going to be located tomorrow. And for the first time last year, they showed some real skill in the intensity forecasts. Is today's storm going to be stronger or weaker come tomorrow? And those are factors that we continue to work on. But again, tropical systems, they're difficult. And part of the reason is they're like us. They come in different sizes. You can have a very small hurricane, like Hurricane Charlie. This was Hurricane Charlie back in 2004, a hurricane force winds confined to a very small area. Or you can have a Hurricane Wilma. Look at this. This thing covered the entire southern third of Florida as it moved across the state. Hurricane Andrew was another tiny hurricane. The hurricane force winds, those incredible winds, were confined to about 20 miles just across southern Miami-Dade County. By the way, this is the 25th anniversary of Hurricane Andrew. Hard to believe it's been 25 years. And as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we learned from what happened. Hurricane Andrew changed a lot of things. Emergency management today is much better because of what we learned from Hurricane Andrew. We're much better equipped to handle big storms. Plus, building codes have changed. The Dade County Code, as it was called, the Miami-Dade County Code, has changed things as well. Some of the hazards associated with a hurricane. Lots of problems. Wind. And we talk a lot about wind when we talk about the storm. The wind, the waves, the rip currents, tornadoes, storm surge, rainfall, and inland flooding. These are the two right here. About 90% of all the deaths at a hurricane are because of drowning, because of water. And this year, for the first time, the National Hurricane Center, they're going to put out what they call storm surge warnings. And at the recent Governor's Hurricane Conference in West Palm Beach, we chatted with the hurricane folks. Ed Rappaport is the deputy director. And I said to him, what would that have been like with Matthew? And he said, with Matthew, you would have had hurricane warnings stretching, say, from Miami-Dade County all the way to North Palm Beach in Palm Beach County. And from Palm Beach County north, including St. Lucie County, you would have had what's called storm surge warning. So the concern here would have been more on water as opposed to wind, whereas a little bit farther south, it would have been focused more on wind. So those are new products that will be rolled out this year by the National Hurricane Center. But often, one of the first impacts you have from a storm, tornadoes. They pop up in the outer rain bands, and of course, the waves and the rip currents, the wind, and all the rainfall and inland flooding. Rainfall is a key. One of the keys for rainfall is the forward speed of a storm. If you have a slow-moving storm, it's going to dump a ton of rain. Whereas if you have a quick-moving storm, like Wilma, like Andrew, not big rain producers. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a hurricane to cause big problems. For example, a tropical depression. You know, the wind's about 35 miles per hour. If it sits on top of you, it'll dump tremendous rains. There was a tropical depression that made landfall near Alvin, Texas, back in 1979. And for baseball fans, Alvin, Texas is known for two things. One, this event that I'm about to tell you about, and also the birthplace of Nolan Ryan. Anyone know who Nolan Ryan is? Okay. One of the greatest baseball players ever, great pitcher, a lot of strikeouts. Anyway, in 1979, this tropical depression had winds of about 35 miles per hour. You know, no big deal, right? It sat on top of Alvin, Texas for 24 hours. They had 42 inches of rain. 42 inches of rain. I mean, that's almost a year's worth of rain in 24 hours. So it's not a big storm. It was not a big wind producer, but boy, it can be a big water producer. Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale, that's the list of hurricanes again. Category 1, 2, 3. This is where Matthew was last year. And that's why I was scared to death for a few seconds. And I'll show you some examples. This is a category 1. Umberto, Claudette, Lily, Katrina. A lot of folks may not remember that before Katrina got into the Gulf of Mexico and made landfall in New Orleans, it caused some problems in Miami-Dade County. Here's a category 2, dangerous. This is Ike. A lot of the buildings in downtown Houston, the skyscrapers, a lot of the windows came out. Here's Wilma. Look at the damage from Wilma, just across this part of southeastern Florida. Here's category 3, Jean. Remember Jean, the storm that came through here in 2004? Sandy, before Sandy moved up to New York. And here's why I was so concerned. Look at Charlie's damage. Punta Gorda back in 2004. The storm hit in August of 2004. Hugo, look at this. Amazing. And Ike down in Cuba. And finally, something we hope we never see again, category 5, Andrew, just amazing. There have only been 3 category 5s, thankfully, that have made landfall. Andrew was one, Hurricane Camille, 1969, hit in Mississippi, and the Labor Day hurricane of 1935 that hit down in the Keys. Category 5s are rare. Matthew, for about 12 hours, was a category 5. It was the first category 5 since 2007. Yeah, 2007, 9 years. So they're rare, and let's hope we never see one, that's for sure. Here's the damage. This is why we tell you to put up shutters. I don't know if this was a shutter not put up properly, but this was in Hurricane Andrew. Look at that, right through that palm tree. And how about that 2x4? That's why window protection is so important. Because you lose your windows, you can lose everything. Freshwater flooding, we talked about this. The number of people who die because of water. And here's an example of flooding from a tropical cyclone. And this was not a big, powerful storm. This was another slow-moving tropical system. Here we go. This is Interstate 10. This is in Houston. That's before the storm. That's the interstate right there. Look at that. I mean, go back. There's the interstate. There's the interstate. So there's so many hazards associated with the storm. Sometimes I think in the media we focus too much on the winds, but it really is all about the water. And that's one of the keys with tropical storms. Tornadoes are another issue. Again, often in the outer rain bands, but some of these tornadoes are amazing, especially right here, Ivan, 2004. The storm made landfall right there and went up the East Coast. Look what it did in terms of tornadoes. This is one day. Here's another day. This is the third day. Look at all the tornadoes this storm produced. It was obviously not a hurricane at that point, but it still had a tremendous amount of issues as it went up the eastern part of the country. So, bottom line, a lot of problems with hurricanes. We don't like them, but we have to deal with them. And because you folks all went through Hurricane Matthew last year, you're now better prepared. The thing about a hurricane is we have plenty of notice. We know windstorms are most likely August, September, October. Now we've got satellites that spot everything. You know, this is not 1928 when a storm just suddenly arrives. We have plenty of notice, sometimes several days. With Hurricane Matthew, we had 7, 8 days notice that the storm was coming. So a hurricane is the one storm no one should ever die from, because we know it's coming, we know what we have to do, and we know exactly how to prepare for the storm. Let's hope it's a quiet 2017. We'll be in the booth if you have any questions. Thanks very much for coming out today. I appreciate it.